Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Melanie Jones Quarles, and I am the director of the Katie Geneva Cannon Center for Womanist Leadership at Union Presbyterian Seminary. For those of you who do not know, the Katie Geneva Cannon Center for Womanist Leadership recognizes the significance of centering Black women's scholarship as viable sources and resources for theological education. The center serves as a site of participatory learning for scholars, students, clergy, laity, and community leaders. Tonight's conversation is connected to the recent screening that we just had in relation to the documentary and film entitled On These Grounds. A video goes viral showing a white police officer in South Carolina pull a Black teenager from her school desk and throw her across the floor. Healer activist Vivian Anderson uproots her life in New York City to move to South Carolina to support the girl and dismantle the system behind the assault at Spring Valley, including facing the police officer. Adding context, geographer Janae Davis treks the surrounding swamps and encounters the homes of formerly enslaved people of African descent, connecting the past to the present. Against the backdrop of a racial reckoning and its deep historical roots, one incident illuminates how Black girls, with the support of organizers, are creating a more just and equitable future for themselves and our entire educational system. On these grounds shines light on students, educators, and organizers who are creating an equitable, just future for Black girls everywhere. Tonight's conversation is particularly special because we are joined by Vivian Anderson herself, founder and executive director of Every Black Girl Inc. Vivian's work is rooted in promoting the health and well-being of youth, families, and communities of color. She is the founder and executive director of Every Black Girl Inc., a national campaign and program that supports and centers Black girls. Vivian has long been an activist and healer, working as the director of youth programming at the Harlem YMCA and the executive director of Momentum Teens. In 2015, Vivian moved to South Carolina to create an organization to fight state-sponsored violence against young Black women. Since then, Vivian and Every Black Girl has grown into an organization advancing radical systemic change needed to have a world worthy of the genius and heart of every Black girl. Welcome, Vivian. We are also joined tonight by another participant in the documentary, Naya Kinney. Naya Kinney was a student at Spring Valley High School in Columbia, South Carolina, when she witnessed and filmed the assault at Spring Valley, during which she was arrested on disturbing school charges and taken to a detention center. Naya withdrew from Spring Valley High School and opted instead to finish a GED. She joined other South Carolina students in a lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of the state's laws against disturbing schools, which are overly broad and apply disproportionately to Black students. Previously, Naya has interned at the nonprofit African American Policy Forum, working alongside Kimberly Crenshaw, and together they work to raise awareness about how the school to prison pipeline impacts all students, but especially Black girls. Naya recently moves and currently lives in Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome, Naya. Our last panelist is my fellow colleague and ethicist on the Charlotte campus, Reverend Dr. Elizabeth Henson Hasty. She received a BA at William Jewell College, an MDiv of Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary, and a PhD from Union Theological Seminary and Presbyterian School of Christian Education, now UPSim. Ordained as a minister of Word and Sacrament in the Presbyterian Church, she is a member of the Mid-Kentucky Presbytery, Dr. Hinson Hasty's service to the church is ecumenical and international. She has represented the World Council of Churches in numerous capacities. On the national church level, she has served as a resource person at the General Assembly, Synod, and Presbytery levels. In addition to her numerous publications, she has also served on the faculty of Bellarmine University, and previously she was on the faculty of St. Andrew's Presbyterian College and now Union Presbyterian Seminary. In 2010, she taught as a Fulbright scholar at the Reformed Theological University in Hungary, and she is married and the mother of one college student and one high school student. A committed church leader, Dr. Hinson Hasty is located, as we know, on the Charlotte campus. Welcome. Tonight's conversation, we are just coming off of watching the documentary, and we were approached by Represent Justice, who is facilitating many of these conversations around the nations, particularly on this documentary on these grounds in connection with others. I not only am just taken from how well the documentary itself was put together, but I'm also just amazed by the courage and tenacity of both you, Naya, as well as you, Vivian, in response to what happened at Spring Valley. I just want to pose the first question to you, Naya. What motivated you to stand up to support Shakara? We know that Shakara was assaulted by a police officer and that you were able to film as well as stand up, and that there were consequences as well, but yet you took on that courageous act. What motivated you to stand up?
You know, this is my favorite question that I get asked when I speak, because it's always like, what motivated you? But there was no motivation. It was reaction, straight reaction. I was just cursing, what the F, just kind of naturally responding to what was going on in front of me, and not understanding why nobody else is freaking out, because, this is what they're seeing. And so it really was like literally a natural reaction. It wasn't a thought of, I have to stand with my sister. Of course, once I'm kind of in handcuffs with her, I'm like, all right, we're in this together, we're in this, they arrested both of us. But it truly was just a natural reaction to what everybody says, protest what was in front of me, but I was like that.
It makes me wonder, Vivian, not only did we kind of see the news spiral right across the nation, but it motivated you to move from New York City to move to South Carolina. What motivated your activism, right, to move to South Carolina to respond to this particular event?
So I always say it, Naya started it, right? Because I was doing my work, because I was always doing work in activism and youth development, the work I've been doing. But when I heard her say, I know I had to stand because she had no one else. And there's a child that said they have to stand for a child. And then after I went and I'm doing the work, and Naya may not remember this, but because, you get all these interview questions, but I clearly, because I remember like, okay, God, I'm going there. Okay, got it. I'm going there. But I clearly remember her saying, I didn't know what to do. I was just going off and I was just praying.
Just praying.
And that part also was like, okay, God, if this is where you're calling me, this is where I'm going. But it's really this child saying that she had to stand for a child. And for all the work we do, how is a child saying they have nobody else but another child? I felt a call to action. She called me to action. She took a stand, and she couldn't stand alone. Like she said, she just responded in that moment and say, okay, Shakara, we're here together now. I wanted them both to know, but you won't be here by yourself.
And I haven't been by myself since.
Dr. Hinson Hasty, there is a larger culture, right, that surrounds this conversation that is related to this kind of justice system that has historically sustained police brutality and violence. Can you
Mhm.
speak to this culture and to what we're seeing emerging here?
Absolutely. And I want to situate myself in the conversation also a little bit with a couple of short stories. And one is I'm from Louisville, Kentucky. Originally, I was born in Louisville, and I really identified, Vivian, with what you said about corporal punishment in schools and paddling and kind of the memory of that in my own experience. I was in the second generation of students that were bused across the city, and corporal punishment was a kind of major practice in the school that I was bused to, and experienced a lot of the resistance in the city, and have just a real awareness of how that affected the culture in the city itself, and even views on school resources officers in the present day. And I wanted to mention that because I thought it was so powerful in the film that it emphasized the connection of the past to the present. And the other brief story that I would share was an elected parent representative on the site-based decision-making council of a middle school, Title I school, where my daughter was a student for 2 years, when we were debating school resource officers and whether or not to provide more resources for mental health. And looking at the budget of the school was just astounded by the lack of investment in the public schools and the resistance to alternatives because of the financial challenges. And it's just so clear that the kind of stories that you're telling and the kind of prophetic work that you're doing is really in response to the legacy of slavery. And what Reggie Williams, who's an ethicist now teaching at St. Louis University, says is the racial script with which we were born. And I would add the gendered script, this kind of expectation that Black girls and also Black women won't have the same kind of emotional response to the kind of barrage of images and expectations that society constantly forces upon them because of living in a white-dominated society. Some sociologists will describe that as a kind of sense of adultification that's not expected of white girls or even white boys in the same way, with the kind of emphasis on penalties. And our conversation will come together more, but I can't imagine here not also dealing with, at least in Shakara's story, the kind of process of disablement that is expected of students, and the kind of process, particularly for students of color in the public schools, because of lack of resources and also the history of racism and slavery in our society. So I hope we can bring that into the conversation with the kind of level of violence that we've seen.
For some of our viewers, they may say, what are some of the myths or biases that exist about policing? And this is for anyone who wants to jump in. Someone said, what are you talking about? There are issues with the police system, right? And that's perhaps because of myths and biases that might exist about policing. So what do you think are some of those myths?
I'll jump in. I think one of the myths is that as a society, and I've talked to a lot of parents, I've talked to a lot of kids, and the statement is, oh, but they're supposed to be there because they're going to keep us safe. And so this idea of policing in school equals safety because police are supposed to protect, right? Oh, and they collapse it with like the mass school shootings, right? So if the police are there, this won't happen, which we know, honestly, it doesn't. All the stats show, all the research shows that police in school has not hindered any of that. Actually, police in school, we have more results of violence because police are often involved in those violence. Mass shootings have happened in school where there are resource officers, but I believe the biggest myth is that police equals safety, and we're collapsing the conversation of what is security versus safety.
Wow, you literally took that line from me. It was my myth was that the police are there to serve and protect when they are causing more harm.
I think you're spot on. This kind of notion that automatically, if there's police presence, then that automatically means safety from everyone, and that's just not always true. I think Dr. Henson Hastings was getting to this, but how does racism and misogyny influence the policing of Black women and girls in particular? I mean, I think folks may be familiar with um, um, Monique's work on Push Out, the criminalization of Black girls in schools, and how we know about this culture of policing, particularly of Black girls. But how does racism and misogyny also influence that reality?
I don't want to keep jumping in, but I'm here. Let's talk. Um, One of the things that happened, right? So when we talk about, because I remember him saying, because one of the things we had long conversation is like he talks about I was the perfect because it was a white man and this Black girl, right? But if he actually looked at it and said, okay, what was it about in that moment where there was this white teacher where this girl asked to leave? This Black girl asked to leave the classroom. He said no. When she did her her legal rights with an IEP, her right was that she get to leave and go to see this counselor, right? Her rights are denied. And then when he feels, because she's like, well, hey, I'll just go online and ask myself, I'll reach out. When he felt like he was like, who are you? And I'm going to talk the way I talk. Who are you, Black girl, to go over me? Now get out of my classroom. He didn't let her leave when she was supposed to. Now, out of punishment, I'm going to punish you because how are you? And even when Ben came in and he was like, hey, oh, so you don't know who I am? This is what I'm going to do. Even how he treated Naya. Oh, so you got so much to say? Let me be very clear. Naya was not the only one that's filmed that day. Naya was the only one arrested, and nobody talks about that. Nobody talks about the fact that the first violation was this white man denying this Black girl her rights to, on her IEP, to actually go to that resource teacher, right? And so I think when we talk about that, people often looked at it, and it hurt my heart when I was in South Carolina because they talked about it as like, oh, well, she did this. What did you expect? I didn't expect this child to be thrown across the room like a rag doll. But when we talk about it, because Dr. Hickson said it, like when we talk about bringing our history of enslavement and we talk about what Janai Davis and all her work is about, it's that, hey, when we look at the hierarchy, Black girls, women, you have no value. How dare you? So I can toss you here, I can toss you there. And when we're looking at how our bodies have been used, it was nothing. Like, I can just do this to you. And so in this moment, I think, like, yes, people can say it was just your child acting out. Okay. Would the same thing have happened if it was a white child? If it was a white little girl? And I even heard a white girl say, I know it wouldn't have happened to me. And I don't know. I'm just really like, we really get to look at how much we've been trained internally that this continues to happen, because we really, like, if we sit and really actually say, let's face this head on, let's look at the harm of history so we can correct our future, we just keep denying the harm of history and thinking we can repair. And so, yeah, those are my thoughts around it. Those are the first things that jump up for me. But yeah, definitely with gender, it's a Black girl. Black girls do that. You're supposed to, they loud, they this. And so, because you brought up Monique Morris and that's some of her work. And when we talk about push out, kids don't drop out. We create environments where we push them and want them to, that they're like, I have no safety here, right? Going back to the safety conversation versus security. And so those are some things that come to mind, and I'm going to stop talking so other people can share.
Gosh, I have several things that are kind of running through my mind. And one of the things I was looking back at a lawyer in the film who was noting the origin of that law, that it really was first a law in 1919, a law against flirting, and this kind of sense of order in school, that there should be a way in which school teaches one to also be part of an orderly society, that I think fails to take account of the kind of way in which our society has changed, and so many assumptions, not only about what a public school should do, what it prepares people to do in society, but also so many assumptions about how we think about law, and as if our legal system is unaffected by the history of slavery in our society, how our police officers have changed or are trained. And I wondered, in thinking about the situation with Ben Fields, how long he had been a police officer. I know, for example, in Louisville, many of the police officers that are sent into the areas of the city that are predominantly Black areas, they're often the newest police officers, most recent trainees. And so they haven't had a lot of engagement or development of relationships with communities. There's just so many themes there to unpack in terms of the injustice that Shakira experienced, and that really has affected her entire life because of these assumptions. And I guess one last thing I'd just pull out from another police officer who was interviewed, and I didn't quite capture his name in writing down my notes, but mentioned the implicit bias that we all have. And when it becomes most dangerous for police is when they fail to recognize that we all have implicit bias, and to deal with that very intentionally and be aware of the way in which we're interacting with others and the assumptions that we're bringing into those kind of interactions. So just so much there to think about how racism and misogyny is impacting this situation.
I think you both touched on something really important. I mean, there's already this sense that feminists and womanists have already kind of made us aware about women's bodies as battlefields, and how the violence enacted upon women's body just because of their gender identity as women already put them in a kind of precarious situation. But multiplied or intersected with that, right, is this reality with race that bears this long history that we've already named, that she deserved it, right? These are the acts by which we began to suggest that certain behaviors or certain actions towards Black women and girls is justifiable, right? And this is related to ways in which they are already racially kind of marked, gender-wise marked, class-wise marked, and certainly marked even in relation to power, for sure. This is just, I just couldn't imagine some of the conversations that both of you were having on the documentary. I mean, coming face to face, we can talk about it as viewers, but certainly in the context of South Carolina, how has this story and now this documentary impacted that particular context? Naya and Vivia, can you speak to that?
I'm gonna let Naya go first.
I don't know if you guys can hear me, but my audio is out. Okay. Well, most importantly, of course, being the lead plaintiff in the ACLU case and challenging that law of disturbing schools in the state of South Carolina, I think that's had the biggest impact on the community. And in South Carolina, students can't be charged with disturbing schools anymore. And students who have already been charged with disturbing schools, it expunges their records I'm sorry, y'all. I'm a little distracted. Record.
Naya, you went out just on that last part there. Oh, Vivian, jump in. She might have had sound trouble.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's happened with the work of the documentary, and I tell everybody, I love the documentary because I think it was so informational. I believe it was unbiased. I think everybody's voice was heard. So you get to hear a full story versus a one-sided because everybody's voice was heard, right? Versus, oh, we're going to interview. So that's one of the things I appreciate about the documentary. Another thing is I believe like I said, when I started out, folks was like, who is this woman coming here? Two girls just got in trouble. And the amount of work that even individuals in South, like Mia McLeod, her work to dismantle the disturbing the schools law, her work to get those amendments made, the work that folks, it's a conversation now, right? And in South Carolina, it has been, it's really like, hey, did we look at that, right? The work that is just like, what do we need to be looking at? What are the things versus like, because I think the documentary did something people weren't expecting. It went and it like, we can all see a video. It brought that video all the way down and it researched every part of it. And so people didn't hear an opinion piece. They said, oh, here's what's really happening. And now they get to decide. And I think it didn't force anybody to say, this is how you should feel, but this is what you need to be aware of. And I think because of that, because of the story, because of that, because I meet people today in South Carolina, it's like, oh, I didn't hear about that. It's forcing people to like, you can't keep saying that your eyes are blind. Now that your eyes are open, what are you going to do? So I really believe it's just a continual call to action. It's not demanding that you do this, you don't do this, you don't do this. It's saying, here's the information. What are you going to do so this does not have to look like this again? And it gives everybody accountability to say, how are you going to stand? What is your, like, it's demanding everybody take responsibility.
Naya, I think you got cut off. Did you want to add something else?
No, I didn't get cut off. I just had hurry up and left before well, as soon as I was done. I'm sorry.
No problem. No problem.
Thank you, though.
Thanks, Vivian. I wonder, we have been talking about not only the problem and addressing the problem. I want to kind of change our position to say, what can we think about in terms of how we might be able to mitigate, right, some of this police brutality against Black girls, especially in schools? Naya, I think you were already speaking about the activism of joining together in order to get the expungement and other things in order to stop these charges, right? But what other ways, or if that is a way, what might you provide in terms of thinking about how we might begin to respond to some of this police brutality and ultimately to change it? So how might we mitigate police brutality against Black girls?
For me, I feel like there should be like sensitivity trainings in schools. I don't understand why there aren't. I think there should be things in place for students to kind of go through before it escalates to a police officer being called into the situation. It'll literally, I said this in my first initial interview, it went from 0 to 100. And there just needs to be like, what do you call it? A common ground. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. In your context, Vivian, what might be some possibilities for us to mitigate or turn this around?
Yeah, one, I think we need to be honest. It didn't start overnight, so it won't end overnight. But there are steps that we can take. I always talk about the 100 steps before, the 100 steps during, and the 100 steps after, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things is that, no, I'm not looking for everybody to relocate and uproot their life every time something happens. But there's a ping that happens in everybody's heart. I think every individual has something where it's like, I think I can do this, but I don't know who I am, right? And so even like right now, we're in the midst of a national election. What about the local elections? What's happening locally? Who's on your school board? Do you know your teacher's PTA committee? Like, do we know those things and what are the laws? Because I know distinctly talking to everybody that folks was like, oh, I didn't even know. Like Naya's mommy was like, I didn't know she can get arrested in school. What y'all talking about? So what are the things, like, how can you educate yourself, get connected? And I know at the end, we're going to talk about the resources that Represent Justice has out so you can actually move forward and like, what's the what next? Be willing to have the conversations. They're difficult and they're hard and they can be emotional, but if we can move all that aside, if our vision is a just and humane society, what are we willing to do to have that? And trust that you can be a part and your contribution is greater than anything. Yeah, and so everybody plays a role, and it's not at the same level, it's not at the same scale, but even volunteering your skill sets. If you are a social worker and you have these skill sets and you know schools aren't providing, is there volunteer time that you can do? Is there something you can connect, organizations connect with schools? Are there ways that we could even connect with teachers? Because I think that's another piece when we talk about the sensitivity training and the implicit bias trainings. Are we having those with teachers as well? What are teachers? Because there was a teacher that made a call. The police didn't just come in. The teacher made a call. So how do we look at every level and how do we like really start supporting? Can we look at people not just behavior? Yes, behavior is there, but can we look at people to figure out what's the underneath that? Let's work with that underneath piece so we can actually stop doing Band-Aids and we can do real surgery.
This is such an important topic that I don't think has enough traction in faith communities, which is why we wanted to have this conversation tonight, as well as introduce this documentary to the folks in our context. Dr. Hastings, how might we bring these stories forward to engage in faith communities?
Thank you for that question. And I want to emphasize that Vivian is showing us the way. When I watch the documentary and see what you are doing in the community, and also the way that you are willing to be in a real authentic conversation multiple times with a police officer, to really engage in a deep way, also in relation to differences, and to try to transform opinions and really advocate in that way. So thank you for showing us the way. I think that is a major contribution. And I also think, and I'll speak out of many of the predominantly white contexts in which I work or have worked in the past, that a major theme here is for predominantly white churches to raise questions and have authentic conversations about the role of whiteness in the public school system and the public education system, and to really have honest, confrontational conversations about the way in which we need to change our expectations of the kind of culture of the public schools, and to reinvest as a society in the public schools, to provide significant funding for mental health counselors, more funding for teachers, more resources, as opposed to policing. I just frankly do not believe that any of our schools should be seen as gateways to jails or to prisons, but rather they really need to be pathways to leadership in our society and also to higher education. And the only way to really accomplish that is to make sure we reinvest in the public schools. I took a moment today to look at some of the areas in which you have a real reliance upon school resource officers and police in the public schools. And in all of those areas, also there is a far lower investment in public school education. These are absolutely conversations that churches can have. And I'm a minister in the Presbyterian Church USA and the Reformed tradition, and I can say that's a deep commitment of the Reformed tradition. It is part of our ethos to emphasize education. It has been historically since the very beginning And I would just, I guess for Presbyterians and also other religious leaders who may be watching this documentary or wanting to enter this conversation, is to emphasize the critical role that also faith communities have played in encouraging and supporting public schools for the sake of a democratic society and for the sake of ensuring that everyone has equal access to education, for leadership, and also for higher education in our society. In my mind, this is one of the most important moral and social issues of our time, because we're at that critical moment with the election year, and a possible transformation of whether or not we're going to move toward greater equality or we are going to turn in another direction. So I'll just come back to Vivian. Thank you for showing us the way through the work that you're doing.
I want to invite folks who are watching online, if you have questions for our panelists or conversations that you'd like for us to engage, feel free to drop a question in the chat, and we will bring that forward. Vivian, let's talk about Every Black Girl Inc. Tell us about it and the work that you're doing there, the continuing work that you're doing.
Okay. Yeah, so we were birthed out of the Salt Spring Valley, starting off as a campaign to just bring awareness. And then it's like, hey, okay, we're going to do a full organization where we're working to create a world where every Black girl thrives. And in our heart, it means that the world around her has to thrive. So what are the things that create a just and thriving society for all people, right? Because I believe if you are hurting, you can't see Naya's hurt. So how do I heal your hurt so you can actually see Naya's hurt? Just recently, we completed our first pilot program. It was called Represent Justice, and it was the Restorative Justice and Healing Training, Healing Fellowship, year-long fellowship for educators and anywhere working in the school system. And so they went through a year. We spent the first 4 months doing interpersonal work with the folks who were the 5 educators who were part of it. Because we talk about how the system is hurting young people. I had to ask them, how have you been hurt by it? Because if I haven't addressed your hurt, you can't see the kids are being hurt. You're like, hey, you don't know what I go through. And so because if it's coming down on me, it's gonna go to the kids. So we spent 4 months just really working with that, and 6 months on restorative and healing justice practices in the classroom, not adding anything new, but reframing and reshaping how you hold a classroom and how you really see your students, and regenerating passion. Because what I saw since COVID is the number of teachers who are leaving the system, and an uneducated world is going to be an economically deprived world, which means we're going to have more crime and harm than anything else. So how do we keep educators there so we can keep educating our young people? And so we just completed our first pilot, and hopefully we'll be able to get the funding to continue to work with educators in that way. We had educators who was like, oh, I was number 1 and sending kids here to the ISS or referred out or calling us in. And now I'm number 1 for being able to hold kids in and really reform what my class looks like, how they work with each other. The violence level in schools have gone down according to their results from being a part of the program. But it's like, how do we wrap everybody around it? So we're really adamant about what does it mean? This is Vivian, right? Vivian is speaking right now, Vivian Anderson, outside of organization. What does it mean when I ask myself nightly, God, make me more like you? What does that look like? What am I willing to do? What are the uncomfortable conversations? What are the spaces where it's uncomfortable? Where does my discomfort end? So the vision that we see for the world that God left us, that we get to walk into. And so that's what every Black girl, we keep striving. So this year I keep laughing because we have more boys in the program this year than girls. And the boys to end gender-based violence against girls and women. What's the harm happening with boys and men that they look to harm others? And then what does it mean to just not live in a box, right? Like, let's not put God, Jesus in a box. Dr. Hastings, you were talking early, and one of the things that came up to me is like, we all walked around with that band. And this is I'm talking to the faith-based community right now. What would Jesus do? Not what y'all been doing. So there's actually a call to action to like actually walk in it and really show up in a different way. I've seen all kind of folks removed because of LGBTQ conversations, all the things, but we haven't stood in this space when we say, what does it mean to say that harm is happening and we get to interrupt it? We get to actually speak our voice and say, this is not safety for kids. And if we're going to be biblical, because I'm going to go here because this is where we are, right? This is the space we in, right? Take care of the children. Are Ubuntu saying in Africa, are the children well? Can we answer that the children are well? And Jesus said, let all the children come unto me. Are we allowing all the children to come unto us? And are we holding them the way Jesus did? So that's some of the stuff where I know God is calling me with every Black girl to move towards, but that's the work we're doing right now.
Wow. Powerful work. I'm so excited to see how it continues to flourish. Vanessa Bradford, who's joined us online, she asked the question, what happened to the teacher who misused his authority? Do y'all know anything about the teacher, Naya?
He's actually, last I heard, he was still working in the school. Students were giving him a little bit of a hard time, but that was a few years ago. Maybe the students who are like coming through the school now don't really know this incident, but I do believe that Mr. Long, let's put his name out there, is still working in the school. And the officer is training, isn't he training officers that go into schools now?
Yeah, I saw that at the end, a part of force training. I think Vanessa opens up a good way of thinking about this, because I think we've talked about this in relation to the police officer or the resource officer, but not in relation to the teacher is also in the room that also has a role in this. That is a reminder to us as educators as well about the ways in which we might be a part of facilitating justice or injustice, even in the classroom, right? In these spaces.
And I think that's that's great, because one of the things we need to know is that when you have folks saying like, this is why we need police in schools, what they need to be very clear about is once police become a part of it, everything else is separate. It's no longer a school issue. So we don't have to reprimand the teacher, the principal, the assistant, the administrator, none of them, because police step in. Anything that happened at that point became a criminal and the law enforcement side. So all of those people get to walk away, because once he's there, all hands off on the other side. And that's what people don't realize. It's like you could have perpetrators of violence in the school, but once police come in, those perpetrators get to stay, because now we're looking at a criminal side. And so that's where when we talk about people like, what do you mean police-free schools? It's because it's like policing free schools. Like, what does it mean to remove the criminality of school? We're not trying to make many prisons. How do we make nurturing, thriving environments? And that actually creates something else.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So Eileen Butler shares this comment. She says, while watching the documentary, I had a reaction to the officer referring to the Black woman bringing up Dylann Roof being taken to Burger King as a conspiracy theory. I applaud Vivian, she says, and the other woman for keeping their composure and speaking truth in the face of those who will dispute it. It reminded me of Dr. Cannon's encouragement. Even when they call your truth a lie, tell it anyway. Linda Davis says, what would Jesus do? I think they were prompted by your call to action, Vivian. Not what you all have been doing. Powerful and so much there to assess. I want to ask, as we continue to think about how we might continue to extend both activism and influence, what are your visions or hopes? How do we create just futures for Black girls?
I was gonna push Naya. I know she turned her head because she like, I ain't gonna answer that. But listen, we're gonna keep saying it and saying it and saying it. Have them at this conversation. Like, I'm a part of this. Like, I participated in the documentary, right? Because Naya called me and said, "Oh, somebody's saying they want to talk to me, and I don't know." And I said, "Listen, I want your voice to be heard. Everybody's telling all the stories." And same thing I said to Shakara. And I was like, and I will walk with y'all through it. And the minute I think they're doing something wrong, I'll be the first one to be like, nah, we're going to snatch it. We're going to do whatever. But it's really like, let those voices be heard. We have these student committees and everything, but are we actually allowing everybody to be a part of what does it mean to create safe spaces? I think I stopped asking. I'm going to be very honest. I stopped having the focus group was girls. I wasn't going to ask them one more time, what do you need, and not provide it. Stop asking and then not provide.
Right. I feel like answering these questions, how do we create a just future for Black girls, just actively listening to and uplifting the perspectives of Black girls in these conversations. It's super important. I'm muting again, y'all.
I want to add also that I think emphasizing restorative justice programs in schools, really working on changing policy in schools, and also having real significant and intentional training about implicit bias, as well as come back to reinvesting in our public education system so that teachers also have the support they need to really be able to pay attention to each student individually so that changes can happen in the classroom, to really engage every learner and have the kind of clarity to see people for their potential rather than any deficits that have been written on them by our society. And so just would be hopeful that significant kind of advocacy around reinvestment in public education can also be part of this.
And shameless plug, anybody interested in the fellowship where we do that work with educators, administrators, principals, willing to do it with any community around the restorative justice and healing practices, how we can reclaim our educational systems, how we can reclaim our communities, and how we can reclaim a safe space for our children. everyblackgirl1@gmail.com. Reach out to Every Black Girl Inc.
Great.
I just want to echo that Represent Justice has given us several calls to action for anyone who's watched today on these grounds or joined us on this discussion even after we finish today. And that is, if you have space or capacity or your faith community or a small group or a large group, consider attending or hosting one of your own screenings of On These Grounds. You can find that information at representjustice.org. There are several films, but On These Grounds is one that you might be able to have a screening, host a screening. And there also is a compatible or a K-12 curriculum guide that educators can use to have this conversation as you have that space available. The other call to action is to consider giving support to Every Black Girl Inc. Donations can be made right there at representjustice.org to support the work that Vivian has already told us about, as well as it seems as if there's a call to action as well to get involved in some of the programming that she has as well. So there is space there at representjustice.org to support Every Black Girl Inc. And that's an option for you as well. And then lastly, if you go again to representjustice.org to the Take Action, there are tons of resources. It's a full resource page to learn more about what's happening in your particular school district, as well as to be able to contact your representatives in support of the Counseling Not Criminalization in Schools Act. One of the things I think that this opens up for us, especially towards the end of the documentary, is that it's still happening. And in many ways, we can look at events like what happened in 2015 and says, oh, that's that community over there, right? That happened in that particular context, and not reckon with the way in which the stories go unreported, they're not as viral, but are certainly happening in our local communities. And there's action that we can certainly take. If you have joined us today, we've dropped in the chat a short survey. It's a few questions there just so we can know more about how to bring better content as well as conversations to you. So if you can complete that short survey there, that would be helpful for us. Vanessa Bradford says, Shakara, Naya, Vivian, wear your crowns, ladies. So proud of you, and you wear them well. Before we close out tonight, any last or final thoughts, Naya, Vivian, Dr. Hinson-Hasty, that you'd like to leave with those who joined us tonight?
I just want to thank you guys for having me here today. Always giving me a place to share my voice, and I'm super appreciative of that. Love you, Viv. I love being in space with you. These like once a month really carry me and keep me going. I love you. I'm gonna say it publicly. I'm gonna say it privately. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, it's just on my heart to say. That's how I move, right? Trust that you were created for a purpose, with purpose. Like God knew you before you were in your mother's womb, and He had a space for you. And there's a ping that happens in people's hearts. Trust it. Trust that God is like actually speaking. You know what to do. People keep asking what to do. Pray for God's courage, for Him to give you courage and the tenacity to stand firm, to put on the full armor of God. Ephesians, right? To put it on and wear it. And so when you have to stand, because I think it's not that people often don't know what to do, it's can I make it through, right? And so trust God for where He's calling you, because I think there are people on this call in the faith-based community that He's calling you. Trust that He got you. And so that's just on my heart to say. And so I would just keep telling people to trust the ping. I'm not asking everybody to move like I move, because if I did it, I'm always obedient. Let me just not lie about that. If you told me to do it 1,200 times, I would keep doing it 1,200 times. However, I know that's not how God is calling everybody. Keep asking God, what are you calling me to do? He had Moses, right? And I ain't gonna give y'all no sermon. But he had Moses, but then he had two to hold Moses' arm up when he couldn't, right? What if you're supposed to be the arm holders? Be the arm holders. So I'm just really asking people to dive deeper in and really stand for what they know they hear Him calling for.
Well, I would just say that at least I always learned from my dad as a church historian that the best way to radicalize someone's thought is by teaching them history. And I want to encourage people to deal with our history and deal with it in a realistic way, in a way that calls us into a future where we will all be able to have an education that is going to create the society, the kind of beloved community that we hope for, and that we have the courage to deal with it and to repair much of the brokenness that we have experienced in the present day, but also with an eye toward the future.
Thank you so much, Naya. Thank you, Vivian. Thank you, Dr. Henson Hasty, for your time with us. It is such a pleasure to hold space with all three of you and to have such an important conversation that I know that we will continue to take with us and continue to share with many others. For those of you who have joined us online, thank you for your time on a Friday evening, for spending time for such an important conversation. And I think we all can lean into Vivian's call to us, which is God is prompting, God is leading you, and so go with God. For those of you who have joined and know about the Cannon Center and all the work that we're doing, you may know that we have an exciting Woman is Preaching intensive tomorrow. So you can join us tomorrow afternoon, or look at our Facebook or our Instagram page, or the Center for Womanistleadership.org for upcoming events. Thank you, everyone, and have a great night. Take care.